Okay, let's continue on. Now, these are really not that much different than the first problem, except you're doing a composition. It just means that we're going to start with the innermost function, then work our way out, and just evaluate as we go. So, starting with this first one in A, I'm going to start with the tan inverse of negative square root of 3 over 3. Now, this will be, remember, quadrant 4, negative 30, or if you prefer, negative pi 6. Might be easier to work with degrees, though it really doesn't matter in this problem. You can go degrees or radians. The final answer is going to be a ratio anyway. It won't be degrees or radians. So this problem simplifies to sine of, I'm just going to go negative 30 degrees. Now the sine of negative 30, we would draw a negative 30-degree angle, which does put us in quadrant 4, where sine is definitely negative. So, sine of negative 30 is the same thing as the sine of 30, like I said, except for the fact that you're in quadrant 4, where sine is negative. Then we evaluate the sine of 30 degrees. Well, that's just 1/2, so our final answer should be negative 1/2. Okay, letter B. Find the arc sine of the square root of 2 over 2. Remember, arc sine is nothing more than sine inverse. It's just another way to write it. So the sine inverse of the square root of 2 over 2, let's just talk degrees. It's easier. We're looking at 45 degrees. And then we just have to find the cosine of 45 degrees. One of those that we should have memorized should be square root 2 over 2. Okay, letter C. Start off with the cosine of pi. Now pi is quadrantal. And like I said, with quadrantals, a lot of times it helps me if I draw out the graph of cosine. So cosine starts at 1, drops down to 0 at pi halves, and then at pi, well, it's negative 1. Really, that's all we needed. Try to hit your points. So the cosine of pi is actually just negative 1. Arctan is the tan inverse. So you're finding the tan inverse of negative 1. Again, remember tan inverse is defined in 1 or 4 for principal values, or the functional inverse. And since we're talking negative, we're definitely going to have to go to quadrant 4. And what I recommended is just ignore the negative, find tan inverse of 1, which is 45 degrees. But you got to go to quadrant 4, so we go with the negative 45 or negative pi fourths, whichever they ask for. I'll give both degrees radians. That might have been the directions. They do not say. So I guess it was up to us. We'll just do both. All right, letter D. Again, we got ourselves a quadrantal in pi halves. Quick picture, quick sketch of sine. We got 2 pi, we got pi. Most importantly, right there at pi halves, what's going to happen? Well, remember sine starts off there at the origin, no transformation. And we get this picture. Mystery solved, the sine of pi halves is 1. So now I have to find tan inverse of 1, which we kind of did over here, but we had negative 1. This is just going to be 45, or pi fourths. All right. Let's keep going here. Okay, let's see, letter E. We got sine of tan inverse of the square root of 3 over 3. All right. So let's start with the innermost function as usual here. Tan inverse of the square root of 3 over 3, that will be 30 degrees. And again, you can go with radians, say it's pi 6, but I would rather find the sine of 30 degrees as opposed to the sine of pi 6. And the sine of 30 degrees should be a nice, pretty 1/2. These take longer to write up on the board than they do to evaluate. Not that I'm complaining. Letter F. Complaining a little bit. Letter F. We got cosine arctan. Arctan tan of -1. And I might as well write letter G while I'm here. Sine of secant inverse. Secant inverse of square root 2. All right, let's go through these. Too much stuff going here. Okay, arctan, that's tan inverse of -1. We've already seen. We're looking at -45 degrees. So we'll find the cosine of -45 degrees. Now again, cosine -45, let's draw this out. That puts us in quadrant 4. Oops. With a reference of 45. So cosine of -5 is no different than the cosine of 45, except for the fact you're in quadrant 4. But remember, cosine is positive in quadrant 4. So cosine of -45 is the same thing as the cosine of 45, which is the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, letter G, secant inverse. Not a big fan. So let's say that this is secant of x equals the square root of 2. Positive will stick in quadrant 1. That's 1 over cosine. And now take the reciprocal of both sides. So cosine of x is 1 over the square root of 2. In other words, square root 2 over 2. And we know that to be 45 degrees again. All right. Don't forget, we still have to do the sine of 45 degrees, which is also the square root of 2 over 2. Let's see. Letter H. Oh, we're doing well on time. Hey, H, we got tan of cosecant inverse of 2. Let's have a look. All right, start off again with, not a favorite of mine, but here we go. Cosecant of x equals 2. That's 1 over sine of x is equal to 2, or sine of x equals 1/2. So what are we looking at? Again, make sure that we are working in the correct quadrant. It's positive, so we're going to say 30 degrees. And then I just have to find the tangent of 30 degrees. And the tangent of 30 degrees is root 3 over 3. All right, we have to Hij. Let's see, I. Ooh, that looks like a nice one. Got a triple composition. You got the sine of the cosine inverse of the tangent of -pi force. One more. And then letter J. My goodness. Cotangent inverse of tan of sine inverse of negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay, well, let's see what happens here. I'll erase the board, that's what happens. Okay, well, triple composition, doesn't matter. Start with the innermost function. Now, remember, pi force, that's 45 degrees. And we're dealing with -45, so maybe a quick picture here. You draw a -45, that does put you in quadrant 4. So we could say the tangent of -45 is equal to just the tangent of 45, but you're in quadrant 4 where tangent is negative. So what we're ultimately looking at is negative square root of 2 over 2. And that's just the first part. So let's rewrite this. Now we have the sine of the cosine inverse of negative square root 2 over 2. All right, cosine inverse, well, it operates in either quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. Quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. It's going to be a quadrant 2 because of the negative. If it was positive, we'd go to quadrant 1. So in this case, ignore the negative and ask yourself what cosine inverse of square root of 2 over 2 is. That's 45 degrees. and that tells us the reference angle in quadrant 2. So that's how the principal value of cosine works. So the reference is 45. So we say cosine inverse of negative square root of 2 over 2. We're looking at 135 degrees. Now, I don't have to draw another picture to find the sine of 135 degrees. I just have to realize, wait a minute, that's a reference of 45. So the sine of 135 is the same thing as the sine of 45. But we're in quadrant 2 where sine actually is still positive. So the sine of 135 is the sine of 45 is the square root of 2 over 2. That was a good one. All right, letter J. Sine inverse of negative square root of 3 over 2. Again, sine operates in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. 1 if it's positive, 4 if it's negative. So we're going to quadrant 4. Ignore the negative temporarily. Sine inverse of square root of 3 over 2. That is 60 degrees. So we're looking at negative 60 degrees. So you got the cotangent inverse of tangent of sine of negative 60 degrees. Nope. We already did the sine inverse of negative 60. One more time. Sine inverse of negative square root of 3 over 2 is negative 60 degrees. Sorry about that. All right, the tangent of negative 60, again, picture, puts us in quadrant 4 again. Reference of 60, so what we're looking at here is tangent of 60 is the same thing as the tangent of negative 60 is the same thing as the tangent of 60, but you're in quadrant 4 where tangent is negative. The tangent of 60 is the square root of 3, so this will be negative square root of 3. And then finally, what is cotangent inverse? Cotangent inverse, get there. Cotangent inverse of negative square root of 3. Not a favorite. So we're looking at the cotangent of x equals negative square root of 3. That would be 1 over tangent of x equals negative square root of 3, or tangent of x equals negative square root of 3 over 3. Okay, so again, we got to look back here. This has to be in quadrant 4, and we have to give a negative answer to this. The square root of 3 over 3 you should recognize for tangent as being a 30 degree. If we're talking negative, we have to go with a negative 30 degrees to put us into quadrant 4 for the principal value, because that's ultimately what we were evaluating. Or if you're talking radians, we're looking at pi 6. I was hoping to finish off problem 2, but not going to happen. Next video.